last day of school. For students everywhere, those 5 words are a symphony of relief, a promise of sun-drenched days, lazy afternoons, and the sweet, intoxicating taste of freedom. It's a day for signing yearbooks, for tearful goodbyes and triumphant exits. A day where the future stretches out like an endless summer highway. But for some, the final bell doesn't signal the start of a carefree vacation. For some, the last day of school becomes a prelude to a nightmare. A day etched not in fond memories, but in the cold, hard stone of terror. Tonight, we're going to pull back the curtain on the sunshine and smiles of the last day of school. We're going to journey into the shadows that sometimes fall on what should be the happiest day of the year. These aren't ghost stories or urban legends. These are 3 true and terrifying last day of school horror stories. So, silence your phones, lock your doors, and settle in. Because class is officially out, but the horror is just beginning. Our first story takes us to Pocatello, Idaho, a place of rugged beauty, a tight-knit community, and a high school that, like any other, buzzed with the electric energy of the final days of the school year. In September of 2006, the students of Pocatello High School were eagerly anticipating the freedom that lay just around the corner. Among them was a vibrant and well-liked 16-year-old junior named Cassie Jo Stoddart. Cassie was known for her bright smile, her artistic talents, and her responsible nature. She was the kind of person you could count on, which is why her aunt and uncle, Allison and Frank Contreras, had no hesitation in asking her to house sit for them over the weekend of September 22nd. The date fell just as the school week was wrapping up, and for Cassie, it was a chance to earn a little extra money and enjoy the peace and quiet of her relative's home on the outskirts of town. That Friday, the last day of the school week, was a day like any other. Cassie went to her classes, chatted with her friends, and made plans for the weekend. The air was filled with the usual end-of-day buzz, but lurking in the hallways, unseen and unnoticed by most, was a darkness that was about to be unleashed. 2 of Cassie's classmates, Brian Draper and Tori Adamkick, both 16, were also making plans for the weekend. But their plans were of a much more sinister nature, fueled by a shared obsession with the slasher film Scream. Draper and Adamkick had decided they wanted to create their own real-life horror movie. They had been secretly recording their plans, a chilling video diary that would later become a key piece of evidence in a gruesome murder investigation. In their self-made documentary, they spoke with a chilling nonchalance about their desire to kill, to emulate the masked murderer from their favorite film. They even had a death list of potential victims. And on that fateful Friday, they decided that Cassie Jo Stoddart would be their first. That evening, Cassie settled into her aunt and uncle's house. Her boyfriend, Matt Beckham, came over to keep her company. The 2 were watching a movie when they were joined by a couple of unexpected guests, Brian Draper and Tori Adamchick. The 4 teenagers hung out for a while, watching TV and talking. Draper and Adamchick seemed friendly, just 2 more classmates looking to kill some time on a Friday night. But their visit had a hidden purpose. While there, they secretly unlocked the basement door, creating an entry point for their return later that night. Around 9:30 p.m., Draper and Adamczyk announced they were leaving to go to a movie. They said their goodbyes and left Cassie and Matt to their evening. A short time later, the power in the house suddenly went out. The sudden plunge into darkness was unnerving. Matt, feeling a sense of unease, called his mother to ask if he could stay the night with Cassie, but she insisted he come home. He reluctantly agreed, leaving Cassie alone in the quiet, isolated house. Before he left, the power flickered back on. What Cassie didn't know was that Draper and Adamczyk had never gone to the movies. They had circled back and were hiding in the basement, waiting for Matt to leave. It was they who had cut the power, a cruel and calculated attempt to lure Cassie and Matt downstairs into their trap. Alone now, Cassie was understandably on edge. The vast, empty house felt different in the dead of night. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the leaves outside was amplified in the silence. She tried to shrug off her fear, reminding herself that she was safe, that the power outage was just a coincidence. But it wasn't a coincidence. It was a prelude. From the darkened basement, Draper and Adamczyk began to make noises, trying to frighten Cassie, to toy with their prey. They were living out their twisted fantasy, playing the part of the movie villains they so admired. Then, they cut the power again. This time, the darkness was absolute, and it was accompanied by a terrifying silence. Upstairs, Cassie's heart pounded in her chest. She was alone, in the dark, and she knew, with a dawning, sickening certainty, that she was not alone in the house. What happened next is the stuff of nightmares. Driven by their depraved desire for fame and a place in the annals of true crime, Draper and Adamczyk ascended from the basement, their faces obscured by masks, their hands gripping hunting knives. They found Cassie in the living room, vulnerable and terrified. And there, in the home she was trusted to protect, they brutally attacked her, stabbing her 29 times. The next day, when Cassie's aunt and uncle returned home, they were met with a scene of unimaginable horror. Their bright, beautiful niece was gone, her life stolen by two of her own classmates in a senseless act of violence. The investigation that followed was swift. When questioned, Draper and Adamczyk's alibi of going to the movies quickly fell apart. It wasn't long before Brian Draper, perhaps cracking under the weight of his guilt, confessed. He led the police to a remote canyon where he and Adamczyk had buried the evidence of their horrific crime. The masks, the gloves, the murder weapons, and most chillingly, the videotapes they had made. The tapes revealed the full, horrifying extent of their planning. The death list, the discussions of who to kill, the chilling declaration that Cassie had to be the one. They had even filmed themselves after the murder, their voices a mixture of shock and a twisted sense of accomplishment. Brian Draper and Tori Adamczyk were tried as adults and found guilty of first-degree murder. Both were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But for the family and friends of Cassie Jo Stoddart, the verdict brought little comfort. The last day of the school week, a day that should have been filled with the promise of a bright future, had become a day of unspeakable tragedy, a permanent scar on the heart of a community. Cassie's story serves as a terrifying reminder that sometimes the monsters aren't hiding in the shadows of our imaginations. Sometimes they're sitting right next to us in class. Our second story takes us to a small, unassuming suburban high school, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and the rhythms of the school year are as predictable as the changing of the seasons. It's a story that wasn't splashed across national headlines, but for the young man who lived it, it was a last day of school that would forever alter his perception of trust and the quiet corners of his seemingly safe world. We'll call him Tim. Tim was a sophomore, a good kid, if a little on the quiet side. He wasn't a jock or a troublemaker, just a regular student, counting down the seconds to the final bell on the last day of school. The day itself was a blur of yearbook signings, half-hearted goodbyes to teachers, and the giddy anticipation of 2.5 months of freedom. As the final bell rang, a wave of euphoria washed over the student body. The hallways erupted in a chaotic symphony of cheers and a stampede for the exits. Tim, however, was in no particular hurry. He had promised his mom he'd wait for her to pick him up, and she was running a little late. So, while his classmates poured out into the sun-drenched afternoon, Tim found himself lingering in the now empty school. The silence that descended upon the building was a stark contrast to the boisterous energy of just moments before. The only sounds were the distant hum of the fluorescent lights and the rhythmic squeak of a janitor's cart down the hall. The janitor at Tim's school was a man named Mr. Harrison. He was an older gentleman, a fixture in the school for as long as anyone could remember. He was a quiet, almost invisible presence, always with a kind, grandfatherly smile for the students. He was the sort of person you'd see every day, but never really notice. As Tim waited near the main entrance, he saw Mr. Harrison pushing his cart towards a little-used storage shed at the back of the school property. There was nothing unusual about this. The shed was where they kept landscaping equipment and surplus supplies. But something about Mr. Harrison's demeanor struck Tim as odd. He seemed furtive. He kept glancing over his shoulder, as if to make sure no one was watching. Curiosity piqued. Tim decided to take a stroll around the back of the school, pretending to be looking for a lost book. He positioned himself behind a large oak tree that gave him a clear, albeit partially obstructed, view of the storage. He watched as Mr. Harrison unlocked the shed and disappeared inside. A few minutes later, the janitor re-emerged, but he wasn't carrying a lawnmower or a box of cleaning supplies. Instead, he was carrying a small, heavy-looking duffel bag. He quickly locked the shed and hurried back towards the school, his usual placid expression replaced by a look of strained anxiety. Tim's teenage mind began to race. What was in the bag? Why was Mr. Harrison being so secretive? The official story was that the shed was just for school equipment, but the janitor's behavior suggested otherwise. Over the next few days, the image of Mr. Harrison and the mysterious duffel bag gnawed at Tim. His summer vacation had just begun, but his mind was still back at that storage shed. He knew he was probably making a big deal out of nothing, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. A week into summer break, Tim decided he had to know what was in that shed. He convinced a friend to come with him, framing it as a bit of harmless summer adventure. They rode their bikes to the school in the late afternoon, when they knew the grounds would be deserted. The shed was secured with a heavy-duty padlock. Tim and his friend were about to give up when they noticed that one of the shed's small, high windows was slightly ajar. With a boost from his friend, Tim was able to wriggle his way through the narrow opening, dropping down into the dusty, cluttered interior of the shed. The first thing that hit him was the smell, a strange, metallic odor mixed with the scent of old wood and earth. The shed was filled with the expected assortment of lawnmowers, rakes, and bags of fertilizer. But as Tim's eyes adjusted to the dim light, he saw something that made his blood run cold. In a back corner, partially hidden beneath a pile of old tarps, were several large, black duffel bags, identical to the one he had seen Mr. Harrison carrying. Hesitantly, Tim unzipped one of the bags. Inside, he found stacks of cash, bound with rubber bands. He unzipped another bag. This one was filled with jewelry, necklaces, rings, and watches, glinting in the faint light filtering through the window. A third bag contained something even more terrifying: handguns nestled in soft cloth. Tim felt a surge of panic. This wasn't some harmless secret. This was serious. He and his friend scrambled out of the shed, their hearts pounding. They knew they had stumbled upon something far beyond their ability to handle. Tim was terrified. He thought about what Mr. Harrison had told him about his sick grandson. What if it was true? What if by telling the police, he was ruining a little boy's chance at life? He was torn between fear and a sense of responsibility. But then he thought about the guns. He thought about the sheer volume of stolen goods. This was more than just one desperate act. This was a criminal enterprise. With a heavy heart, Tim knew what he had to do. He went to the police and told them everything he had seen. The investigation that followed confirmed Tim's story. It turned out that Mr. Harrison, the quiet, grandfatherly janitor, had been involved in a string of burglaries across several counties for years. He had been using the school's storage shed as his personal hiding spot, a place no one would ever think to look. The story about his sick grandson was a lie, a carefully crafted manipulation to prey on the sympathies of anyone who might get too close to his secret. The news sent a shockwave through the community. No one could believe that the man they had trusted, the man who had been a quiet fixture in their children's lives for so long, was capable of such deception. For Tim, the last day of school was no longer a memory of freedom and excitement. It was the day he learned that even the most familiar faces can hide the darkest of secrets. It was the day his innocence was shattered, replaced by a chilling understanding that danger can lurk in the most unexpected of places, and that sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones we think we know. Our final story comes not from a police report or a news article, but from a first-hand account. A story shared in the quiet corners of the internet. A chilling reminder that sometimes the most terrifying experiences are the ones that happen to ordinary people on ordinary days. The storyteller, we'll call her Jenna, was a high school senior just weeks away from graduation. The last day of school for seniors was a strange mix of emotions. There was the elation of being finished, the nostalgia of leaving behind a place that had been the center of her world for 4 years, and a touch of anxiety about the future. The day was a whirlwind of final exams, yearbook signings, and emotional goodbyes. When the final bell rang, a sense of finality washed over Jenna. This was it. High school was over. As she walked home that afternoon, the sun warm on her face, she felt a sense of liberation. The familiar route, one she had walked thousands of times before, felt different today. It was the last time she would walk it as a high school student. She was about halfway home when she first noticed him. He was standing on the corner of a quiet residential street, a man she didn't recognize. He was of average height and build, dressed in nondescript clothing. There was nothing particularly remarkable about him, but something about the way he stood, the way he watched her, sent a shiver down her spine. She tried to dismiss the feeling. It was broad daylight, on a street she knew like the back of her hand. She was probably just being paranoid. She crossed the street and continued on her way, quickening her pace slightly. A few blocks later, she glanced over her shoulder. He was still there, walking on the opposite side of the street, keeping pace with her. Her heart began to beat a little faster. This wasn't a coincidence. She made a random turn down a side street she didn't normally take, hoping to lose him. She walked for a few minutes, her ears straining for the sound of footsteps behind her. When she finally dared to look back, her stomach dropped. He had turned down the same street. He was closer now, close enough for her to see the unnerving calmness in his expression. Panic began to set in. She pulled out her phone, her fingers fumbling with the keypad as she pretended to make a call. She spoke in a loud, cheerful voice, hoping to give the impression that she was talking to someone who was expecting her. "Hey, yeah, I'm almost there. Just a couple more blocks. See you in a minute." It was a bluff, and a clumsy one at that. The man didn't react. He just kept walking, his eyes fixed on her. Jenna's mind was racing. Her house was still several blocks away. The streets around her were quiet, most people still at work. She was alone, and she was being followed. She made another turn, this time onto a busier street, hoping to find safety in numbers. But the man followed, undeterred. He was like a shadow, a relentless, silent presence that was slowly draining her of all hope. She thought about screaming, but the sound was caught in her throat. She thought about running, but her legs felt like lead. She was trapped in a waking nightmare, a horror movie playing out in real time on the familiar streets of her own neighborhood. As she rounded a corner, she saw a small grocery store, a beacon of light in her growing darkness. With a surge of adrenaline, she broke into a run, not daring to look back. She burst through the automatic doors, her chest heaving, her eyes wild with fear. She stumbled to the nearest employee, a teenage boy stocking shelves, and gasped, "Someone's following me." The boy, to his credit, didn't hesitate. He looked past Jenna out the front window and saw the man standing on the sidewalk, watching the store. The boy immediately called the police. Jenna stayed in the store, hidden from view, until the police arrived. When they did, the man was gone. He had vanished as quickly and as silently as he had appeared. The police took her statement, but there was little they could do. She couldn't provide a detailed description of the man, and there were no other witnesses. They drove her home, her last day of school now a blur of fear and anxiety. For weeks after that day, Jenna was a prisoner in her own home. Every time she left the house, she was consumed by a gnawing paranoia. Every stranger she passed on the street was a potential threat. The familiar comfort of her neighborhood had been replaced by a constant, low-level dread. She never saw the man again. She never found out who he was or what he wanted. But the memory of his silent, relentless pursuit on her last day of school has stayed with her. A chilling reminder that sometimes the greatest horrors aren't found in a haunted house or a dark forest. Sometimes they're found on a sunny afternoon, on a quiet suburban street, on what should have been the happiest day of your life. The last day of school, a gateway to summer, a celebration of a chapter closed. But as we've heard tonight, for some, it's a day that marks the beginning of a different kind of story. A story of fear, of loss, of the chilling realization that the world can be a much scarier place than we ever imagined. The stories you've heard are true. They are a testament to the fact that horror isn't confined to the pages of a book or the screen of a movie theater. It's a part of our world, a shadow that can fall at any time, in any place. So the next time you hear that final bell ring, the next time you walk out of those school doors for the last time, remember these stories. Remember that even on the brightest of days, it's always a good idea to look over your shoulder. You never know who or what might be walking behind you. The stories you've heard tonight are over, but the feeling they leave behind, that cold knot in your stomach, the sudden urge to check the locks on your doors, that's a feeling we all share. If you believe that the most compelling horror isn't fiction, but fact, then you've found your community. You found your home in the shadows. Don't let the darkness swallow these stories. Cast a like on this video. Think of it as lighting a candle that helps other curious souls find their way to our campfire. It tells the algorithm that you want more tales from the edge of reality. And we want to hear from you. The halls of every school hold their own secrets, their own whispers of unnerving encounters. What about yours? Did a teacher ever give you the creeps? Did you ever experience something on school grounds that you still can't explain? Share your own chilling school story in the comments below. I'll be reading through them, and your experience might just be the one that keeps us all up at night. Next, to ensure you don't miss our next descent into the terrifying truth, make sure you subscribe to the channel. And when you do, ring that final, fateful bell, the notification bell. That way, you'll be the first to know when the next story begins. Until next time, stay vigilant and never assume you're truly alone.